cloud of flame!
Seed, a limited electric attacker, has found her way into Zenless. I don't know what it is about electric attackers that makes them so popular, but thankfully for Seed, rather than taking over the slot of other electric attackers like Harumasa or SAnby, Seed actually works with them. For now, let's break down Seed's kit and the intricacies behind her moveset, and go through the combos at the start so that you know how you can get the most out of what she can offer. I will be covering some of her teams and builds, but on a different video, so do keep an eye out for that. For now, we'll get right into how Seed plays. Seed is unique in a sense that, unlike other additional abilities, which tend to have 2 or more criteria, Seed only has 1. Attackers. It's pretty straightforward, 30% increased damage and 25% electric rest rate on some of her basics and ultimate, which we'll go through in a bit. It also gives 2 energy to the Vanguard whenever Seed deals damage as the active character, with a 1-second cooldown. Keep in mind that this isn't 2 energy every 1 second, it's dependent on how often Seed is attacking and won't work if you swap out of her, as on-field but inactive attacks won't count. To understand what the Vanguard is though, we need to talk about Seed's core passive. Like Hugo, character roles influence Seed's core passive, but this time it's non-negotiable. The entirety of her core passive only works if there is an attacker on the team. All this is to say, you will never run Seed without a second attacker, else the character just won't function. This is why she isn't replacing Harumasa or SAnby in teams. There's a lot of text for something that's quite simple in practice, but important to understand in its entirety. The Vanguard is an attacker that isn't Seed with the highest base attack. Whenever they use an EX special, Seed gets a buff, called Onslaught. This buff gives 1000 attack and 30% crit damage, lasting 40 seconds. Whenever Seed uses an EX special, then the Vanguard gains a buff, called the Direct Strike. And that gives the exact same 1000 attack and 30% crit damage, also lasting 40 seconds. Whenever both buffs are active at the same time, an extra buff, Besiege, gives 25% damage bonus to both Seed and the Vanguard. So having Seed in the team is the equivalent of getting a free Astra for both Seed herself and the Vanguard. Although both the Onslaught and Direct Strike buffs do the same thing, remember that they have their own timers. If you use an EX of the Vanguard, you refresh the buff on Seed. But if Seed hasn't used an EX, then the buff on the Vanguard falls off, which means Besiege also falls off. It's very important to note that all of these buffs only work when the character is active. If you use an EX and apply the buff, the other character will not gain any bonuses until you swap to them. If you swap out of them, then the buff ceases to work as soon as the character goes off-field or 3 seconds pass, whichever comes first. The buff is still ticking, 40 seconds and all. Swapping to them again will bring the buff back, but it won't work if they're not the active character. Since it lingers until the character goes off-field, this means that swap cancels are still fine, so long as the attack isn't longer than 3 seconds. In practice, this isn't an issue, as there aren't any attackers right now with a skill that lingers for more than 3 seconds. Yes, even Evelyn. So just make sure to use an EX special every 40 seconds on both Seed and the Vanguard, and you're good to go. Given that Seed gives the Vanguard energy, it's not too difficult to keep up. Although you will want to do it faster than that from when you start the fight. All buffs apply by default as soon as Seed and the Vanguard load into a fight, so you don't need to spend energy to get the buffs to work at the start. But it doesn't apply on entering combat, it's on entering the battlefield. So if you load into Shiyu or Deadly Assault and go get yourself some tea, you want to restart again, because the buff is ticking even without the boss having spawned. And as expected, it doesn't refresh when the boss does spawn. To add insult to injury, it's ticking even during the entry cutscene, so no matter how fast you run to the boss, you're always going to be a few seconds behind. You also want to be using EX specials for more than just a buff, as Seed also feels a unique resource gauge, Steel Charge, whenever the Vanguard uses an EX special. Every 1 point of energy consumed by the Vanguard gives 0.5 points of Steel Charge, and this is going to be very important for combos later on. Generating Steel Charge is a really big deal, because almost all of Seed's burst revolves around this. Steel Charge is a gauge underneath Seed's portrait, and has a maximum value of 150. Almost every attack Seed does will generate Steel Charge, with basic attack being the one you'll be using most often. You notice a little notch there, which indicates 120 Steel Charge, and the gauge will turn yellow once it's been reached. Her basic attack string isn't all that impressive, although it can do some good damage on its 4th hit, and it has a special property where it automatically dodges attacks between the 3rd and 4th hit cast, with a very lenient window. After the 4th hit of her basic, Seed will transition into Falling Petals Slaughter. This is when Seed Senior gets summoned to do a punch attack. The punch doesn't generate Steel Charge, and to be entirely honest, isn't actually all that good. The damage modifier on it is less than half that of the 4th hit of her regular basic attack string. so it looks impressive, but it's little more than a fast attack. Since it is fast, it's not necessarily bad to use it, and it can supplement other abilities as there's many ways of shortcutting into it, like with dodge counter, quick assists, assist follow-ups, or EX specials, if fully channeled. But if you're in a fight and getting attacked, you may be better off just skipping the punch and spamming dodge counters instead. Getting more steel charge tends to be better than the middling damage from the punch. That cannot be said for when Seed has reached that 120 steel charge threshold though, as after which, tapping your holding attack after Falling Petals Slaughter will lead to Falling Petals Downfall. There's two forms, as the game calls it, but they always execute together. First form, where Seed Senior dashes back firing rockets, and second form, where he then slams down while summoning a bolt of lightning. Instead of a measly 330% damage multiplier, the whole Falling Petal string has a total value of 3,370. For context, SAnby's entire ultimate does 3,470. It's this Falling Petal string that lets Seed pumps out such ridiculous damage numbers, and unlike other characters, like Evelyn, who need to save their resources for the stun period, Seed gets her steel charge pretty easily. Against a new boss, I could reliably get 2 full Falling Petal strings and still have enough gauge for a third in time for the stun combo. If you have 120 steel charge, Chain Attack can shortcut into the punch, when it cannot do so normally. An ultimate skips the punch and goes straight into the downfall follow-up, which is a big deal for fitting in multiple Falling Petal strings and stun combos. There's also a stack system. Once Seed crosses the 120 steel charge threshold, holding basic attack will also shortcut to the punch. This will consume a stack though, which means you cannot use the hold basic shortcut again until you spend steel charge and build it back up past the threshold. No punch spamming allowed. Well, I guess you can stack different shortcuts together and it kind of works, although given the low damage multiplier for the punch, it's not something you want to do. It'd also be remiss of me to not mention that Seed can sometimes feel very clunky. You won't get the downfall follow-up automatically, which can lead to situations where you go into the punch but swap out too early. On the flip side, because so many moves lead to the punch, you will need to dodge cancel out of it so as to not accidentally go into the downfall follow-up when you don't want to. But all of this pales in comparison to steel charge breakpoints. You will very often find yourself in situations where you might be a single point off of having 120 steel charge in a critical period. This table shows off how much steel charge each move generates. Note how, other than the ultimate and Vanguard energy conversion, there are no whole numbers. So if you're maxed out at 150 steel charge and use a Falling Petal string, you're down to 30. If you then chain a Seed, that's 29.52, so you're up to 59.52. Use ultimate and that's 60, taking you up to 119.52 steel charge, less than half a single point off being able to use the full Falling Petal string. This means you don't get the ultimate shortcut to downfall, messing up combos. It doesn't help that the devs decided to center the threshold bar instead of making it left aligned, so you may think you only need one hit, but you actually need multiple instead. Unfortunately, it's how the character is. This has been tested on the Creator Experience server though, so values may change post-release, but I wouldn't bet on it. Combos have to factor this in. The rest of Seed's kit is pretty straightforward, although it has its own gimmicks too. Chain attack is okay. The damage is nothing to write home about, especially for how slow it is, but it does generate a decent amount of steel charge. Again, keep in mind it's half a point short of 30, which can throw off combos if not worked around. There's also an issue where, because Seed appears so far from the enemy, she may end up being too far to trigger a chain attack, which may mess up combos. Again, Creator Experience server. Ultimate is insanely strong, having the highest single damage multiplier out of any skill in the game. If you thought Miyabi's 4,776% ultimate was big, then Seed's 6,500% should blow your mind. When coupled with the steel charge generation it provides, it leads to both absurd levels of burst and 2 full Falling Petal strings in a single stun combo. Seed's EX special is very strong for generating steel charge. If you tap, it will use up only 10 energy and do a tiny explosion. If you hold, it will continue to consume energy until it's used up 60 total as Seed Senior keeps firing rockets, and then it will shortcut to the punch after. You can let go early at any point for the explosion, and this will lead to a heavy attack, which can trigger chains. But Seed does a flip off Seed Senior when this happens, which animation locks up for as long as the punch, so you're not really saving all that much time by ending it early. I should mention that the rockets are not finishers or heavy attacks, so this is a pretty effective way of stalling the stun period while simultaneously building steel charge. Since you can do the full Falling Petal string right after it, it's one of Seed's best openers. The rest is unremarkable. Her assist follow-up is okay, but it's really slow. Its range looks big, but it's deceptively short, which means that against some bosses, namely the new one, you might end up stuck in animation with little to gain from it. Dodge counters are a more efficient way of building up steel charge, but given you get 352 decibels from one defensive assist into assist follow-up, it's still very much worth using. And on that note, dodge counters are pretty good. They do good damage, are quite fast, build a lot of steel charge, and shortcut to the punch. Nothing special about it, just good values. Her regular special isn't special either, but with terrible values across the board. There's no reason to ever use it. Before we go and cover the combos, I should mention that Seed is a manual chain character. This is because the punch is a heavy attack, and that means it triggers chains. Even if you have over 120 steel charge and can do the full falling paddle string, the chain prompt will interrupt the attack. So unless you're getting the punch to hit just before the stun begins, this can ruin combos. It's even worse if you're opening your combo with a hold basic attack. If you happen to use it and don't go into the downfall follow-up, you won't get to use the hold basic shortcut again. If your combo only uses 2 chain attacks, like the Seed Trigger SAnby one, then you can get away with not using manual chain, as if you're fast on cancelling the chain prompt, you can still continue into the downfall follow-up. But you still probably want manual chain up for the other characters, like SAnby, who need it for the combo. And don't forget about chain recalcs. I won't go into detail here, as I already covered its intricacies before, but in short, the stun bar pauses when you start a stun or trigger a chain attack. But if you trigger a chain attack before the pause at the start of the stun expires, then you won't get the pause from triggering a chain, which means less stun time and less damage. Depending on how tight the combo is, like trying to fit a SAnby EX just before the end, then you will need to say goodbye to that without that extra time. And goodbye to any triple chain combos, as they wouldn't be possible if you're cancelling a chain. Thankfully, the input is quite easy, as holding basic attack automatically transitions into the downfall follow-up anyways. Now that we've gone through how Seed works, let's break down her combos. The bread and butter route is fitting in 2 full falling paddle strings and an ultimate within the stun window. All in all, it isn't actually that hard to do in isolation. In fact, since Seed doesn't need to chain twice, you can do her basic combo with a VR enemy. Open stun with a falling paddle string, use 60 energy on a vanguard, and then chain. Send a chain first for King of the Summit helps here. From there, go into her ultimate. All of that combined will usually be enough for a second falling paddles, which even elites have plenty of stun duration for. So if you get used to this combo in VR, you're more or less set to go for all the other Seed combos. It's that simple. Where things get interesting is when we look beyond just Seed. How can we weave in as much as the Vanguard's burst while Seed is busy doing the falling paddle string? Let's go over the Seed SAnby trigger combo first. We start with Seed's EX special to build steel charge and stalling the start of the stun period, buying enough time to fill up the gauge for a punch starter. As soon as you see the punch wind up, hold basic for manual chain and the automatic follow-up to falling paddles downfall. As soon as Seed starts dashing back, we let go of basic and swap to SAnby as fast as possible for her EX special, which is important here to generate steel charge. We're forced to do a special here before the EX due to how the input works, which is another reason to use manual chain, but this also helps get more damage in, so having 1 stack of the silver star mark does help. This is also good if you're running Shadow Harmony on SAnby, as a singular special would refresh its 4-piece stacks. At this point, we'll let go of the special button because we want a chain prompt, which we'll use to go straight to trigger to refresh King of the Summit. After trigger chain, it's straight to Seed chain. We don't want SAnby chain as it's way too slow, deals a little damage, and we don't need any silver star mark buildup. The EX from the opener already maxed out all stacks. So we cancel into 1 quick basic attack and then ultimate. It is very important that you do this singular basic attack after the chain. You only need a single hit to land. This is required as Trigger's harmonizing shot does not work on chains or ultimates. So the dash shred and stun damage % bonus that Trigger applies at the start of the combo is falling off, and that means not a single hit of the ultimate benefits from it. Technically, coordinated support could be used, but Seed's EX, chain, and ultimate take so long that even if you were to use Trigger's EX before the stun, it just about fall off before the ultimate lands. So do a singular hit of the basic to refresh Trigger's debuff into ultimate. Once Seed slams down, we have enough steel charge for another falling paddles downfall. It isn't perfect though. SAnby's EX followed by Seed's chain and ultimate is only 119.52 steel charge, not 120, but most of the time you have enough. And I do mean most of the time, not all of the time. Again, very frustrating. I hope that they change at least chain to be 30 points at release because this has killed far too many of my runs. Either way, as soon as falling paddles downfall begins, swap to SAnby and start mashing special. Here's where we use a 3 stacks built from the EX in the opener. With how this fight lines up on the new boss, you should have SAnby ultimate ready for at least 2 out of 3 stuns. If optimized, possibly all 3. So SAnby ultimate it is, followed by 3 more specials, and if you've executed everything correctly up to this point, enough time and energy to slot in one more EX special right before the stun ends. And that's the combo. The principle is the same as the VR one. Falling Petals downfall, chain, ultimate, Falling Petals downfall. But what makes it good are the little things. Setting up SAnby's silver star marks and building up steel charge in the opener. A singular basic to refresh triggers debuffs. And squeezing in a part of SAnby's burst rotation at the very end. Other characters can be even more engaging, so let's see how we can adapt to a Seed, Evelyn, Astra combo. Like for the SAnby combo, it all starts before the stun period, except that instead of using Seed's EX, we're opening with Astra's ultimate. Although the chain won't do much damage here, the steel charger provides us pretty handy, as this time we'll need a full 150 points. Seed's chain should not initiate the stun. As mentioned before, chain doesn't usually allow for a shortcut to the punch, but if Seed is over 120 steel charge, it can. So we want chain attack to take us as close as possible to stun, then have the punch or downfall follow-up trigger it. Since staying on Seed while she downfalls is a waste of time, we make use of the second stack from Astra's ultimate to go into an Evelyn chain, which will land shortly after Seed is done with all of her hits. You can go into Seed chain here, but there's plenty of time in the combo to squeeze in an Astra chain. Once that lands, it's Seed chain, and then finally, Evelyn chain. Since we opened the stun with Astra's ultimate chain, and not the burning tether points chain, we can use that here and immediately quick assist to Seed to go into her ultimate. With that, we just about have enough steel charge for a shortcut to downfall, and enough time for a swap to Evelyn to get her ultimate in before the stun ends. Technically, we don't actually have enough steel charge for Falling Petals downfall. Think about it. With 150 steel charge, we spent 120 on the opener, so 30 left. Seed's chain is 29.52, and ultimate is 60, so that's half a point off 120. Unlike with the SAnby combo, we can't overcap, nor are we using Evelyn's EX special for the energy to steel charge conversion. The secret lies in the quick assist. You only need 2 or 3 frames worth as Seed begins attacking the instant the quick assist is triggered, and that gives us the half point needed for the combo. It can be hard to set up as you will need Astra to regenerate energy in time, but the combo is quite lenient. There's plenty of time to squeeze in an Evelyn EX special if you need it, or you can hard swap and do a single hit of a basic attack, similar to how it is for Trigger in the SAnby combo. It should work even if it's the punch that initiates the stun rather than downfall. You'd think that we have a lot less stun time if it's the punch triggering the stun instead of downfall, but remember, stun recalcs. Evelyn's chain trigger overlaps with the stun at the start, so in reality there's very little difference in stun time. Worst case, you can just skip Astra chain and go straight to Seed chain in the opener and have even more time to fit in an Evelyn EX or Seed basic. Last but not least, let's go through the Seed Harumasa Nicole combo. I have a soft spot for Harumasa, but being frank, he doesn't feel particularly good for Seed, as there just isn't time to benefit much from his dash attack damage. He does, however, bring plenty of style. We open the combo with Nicole's EX. Before 2.2, you'd have wanted to wait for her quick assist to gain Astra voice stacks, but we've got a new support set. In fact, that's the set I was using on Astra for the Evelyn combo too. It's slightly less damage than Astral Voice for Astra, but much easier to upkeep, so in practice it feels better. And for a character like Nicole, it's objectively the best support set. So with EX activated, the buff is up and full, and we can go into Seed's punch. The normal route here is to swap the Seed into a hold basic for the punch, but I guess doing it after an unintentional dodge counter works too. Like with SAnby, we swap out a Seed as soon as she goes into downfall and then use EX on the Vanguard for steel charge. But unlike SAnby, Harumasa has a nifty little chain tag with his ultimate. Time it right, and we get an animation cancel out of his recovery frames into a chain trigger. Since Seed is nowhere near done with downfall, we chain with Nicole, which has the added benefit of reapplying her Death Shred. From there we go to Harumasa chain, and since we used an EX, the 6 quivers from his chain attack supersede the ones from the EX, building 6 Electro Prison stacks on the enemy for free. Lastly, Seed chain. But here we aren't going to ultimate straight away. With Nicole's Death Shred about to run out, it's a good opportunity to use her ultimate, after which we quick assist the Seed and then ultimate. The quick assist also means that you're guaranteed to not be out of steel charge, even if you were at precisely 120 when the combo began. With Seed's ultimate taking as long as it does, Nicole's Death Shred is falling off again, so after downfall begins, swap to Nicole for an EX and straight to Harumasa to sneak in 3 dash attacks. Since there's still quivers on field from his chain attack, you can get some extra out of stun hits in after an aimed shot. The combo showcase do make use of a lot of ultimates, but really you only need Seed's ultimate. I hope that with the knowledge from this video, thinking up new combo routes won't be too hard. If anything, not trying to squeeze in ultimates can open up entirely new combo routes. Seed is a very strong character, and weirdly, one that approaches power creep in a creative way, needing other attackers for her passives to work. Whether intentional or not, this ends up being key to skill expression on her. There just isn't all that much complexity otherwise. Her general combat is very straightforward, just spam basic attack. Her combos are too, Falling Petals Downfall, Chain, Ultimate, Falling Petals Downfall. But it's in weaving other characters' text, rotations, and burst with Seed in a tight stun period that lets you get the most out of Seed comps. And if you are interested in understanding how Seed works with a variety of comps, or you're interested in how she performs against the new boss coming to Deadly Assault, why not like, share, subscribe, and ring the bell? I've got more videos coming. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time.